Chapter 10. The Errand. It was a day near New Year's Eve. Otami said to her husband, "No, we can't send anybody today. Naokichi has already gone shopping to town." She made her remarks standing in the living room to show how busy she was. "Then can't you ask Oito?" said Shunsuke, looking up at her. He was sitting at the oblong brazier with his elbow on it to support his chin. "Of course not," she said sharply. "I need her. We are very busy today. In a few days, let me send somebody to the Masakis for the presents. Why not pass it on then?" The Masakis were Otami's parents. "But this is urgent. I'm asked to hand it on as soon as possible too." "Will it go bad very soon?" said Otami. "No, it won't. It's a smoked salmon," said Shunsuke. "But your parental family may be thinking of buying one for their New Year banquet. Besides, I have to remind your parents of the sender." "How hasty you are today. You're usually so carefree, aren't you?" "You're the opposite," said Shunsuke. "No kidding," said Otami. "Anyway, I want somebody to send it to the Masakis today." "Nobody's available today," she said again bluntly and started to go out. "What do you think of sending Kyoichi?" said Shunsuke, sitting at the brazier leisurely. "He is old enough for this errand, I suppose." "He's timid and has never gone there by himself," said Otami. "And your mother won't allow us to do such a thing." It's a bother," he said. "Kyoichi shouldn't be treated so indulgently." "Then how about sending Jiro?" "Don't be silly," cried Otami. "However headstrong he may be, it's too much for him." "I don't think so, Otami," he said. "All right, let me send him, but he may not know how to go there." "He ought to know it because I took him to the Masakis several times," said Otami. "But don't you think it too much to send him away by himself? Why not send him together with Kyoichi?" "That's a good idea," he said. "Grandmother won't say no if we send him with Jiro." "I'm not sure." "Anyway, you bring them here right away, please," said Shunsuke. "If grandmother objects, let me think up another plan." Otami left unwillingly and soon came back with the two boys. They were told to kneel down politely before their father. "I want you to go to the Masakis and hand this box to grandfather Kyoichi," said Shunsuke. Kyoichi looked up at his father with a troubled face. Any word did not escape his mouth. "Can't you go by yourself? Then you can go with Jiro," he said, but Kyoichi still made no reply and turned to Otami with a puzzled look. "Don't you like to go there even with Jiro?" he said. "I'm sure grandfather will be pleased to see you." Kyoichi kept silent, edging up to Otami with his head drooping. "I see," he said and turned to Jiro. "What do you think of it?" He was peeping into his brother's eyes several times during their conversation. He looked at him again and said gaily, "Kyo-chan, let's go." Kyoichi shot a side glance to Jiro but still kept silent. "If Kyoichi won't go, you go by yourself, Jiro," said Shunsuke, smiling weirdly as if to allure the little boy. He was not so bold as to say yes on the spot. Twisting his head in hesitation for a minute, he said to his father, "What shall I do if I get lost? I can go as far as the bridge, but—" "If you get to the bridge, it isn't very far," said Shunsuke. Really? He said with an uneasy look. When you cross the bridge, you turn right and go along the bank, said Shunsuke. Then you see a house. You go down the bank just before it and go straight. You can't miss it. Oh yes, I remembered, said Jiro. Let me go, father. Great, said Shunsuke encouragingly. You can stay overnight if you like. Jiro rose to his feet, tied up his belt, and got ready to set out. Shunsuke watched all this with interest, forgetting to give the sermon to him. Are you really all right, Jiro? Said Otami with a worried look. Yes, I am, he said proudly, and was about to leave. What a rash boy you are, said Otami. Do you know your job, Jiro? Then she turned to Shunsuke, saying, You should tell him what to do, shouldn't you? Oh yes, he said and turned to Jiro. Please take this box to the Masakis. There's a letter in it. You have only to hand it to somebody there, right? Receiving the wrapped parcel, Jiro stepped down to the dirt floor and was swinging it back and forth. Otami was anxious about him and went as far as the gate with Kyoichi. She reminded him of this and that, but Jiro barely listened to her warning. It was about 4 kilometers from Jiro's house to the Masakis. It was a little past 2, but was very cloudy and seemed as if the sun was going to set at any moment. As he walked along, Jiro grew lonesome. He saw several scarecrows left standing in the harvested rice paddies. Their white heads, made of porcelain sake bottles, were swaying to and fro in the wind, which made him feel uneasy. How surprised he was when a black dog jumped out of an oak grove where he had been told foxes lived. Jiro shrank back in fear. He had passed 2 communities before he reached his destination. In each village, he was stared at by the curious children who stopped their playing. Jiro felt scared that he might be bullied by them. He had never felt so tense since he threw Kyoichi's school bag in the toilet. Finally, he got to the crossroads near the Masakis when he gave a sigh of relief, wiping his nose with the edge of his sleeve. His pace slowed down abruptly at the sight of the house. Jiro liked the Masakis, which was one of the reasons why he felt like going all the way to see them. Grandfather Masaki had taught spear fighting to the young boys of the warriors' families of a feudal clan before the restoration in 1867. As soon as it came to an end, he turned to wax manufacturing business and succeeded in it. He was a very respectable personality in the district and was loved by everyone for his polite, generous, and merciful nature. Grandmother Masaki was known as a pious lady and never showed a sullen look to the villagers. Jiro was sure that they belonged to a different society from his parental family. The Masakis were a very large family. As well as the grandparents, Jiro's aunt, Otami's elder sister, lived there with her husband and 6 children. Besides, about 10 employees were always working for the Masakis. It was a really busy and lively home. Their meal times were quite noisy and filled with a carefree atmosphere. The children were so simple and easygoing that Jiro could play with them merrily. Would they ask him to stay overnight? Thinking of this and that, Jiro entered the front yard. When he stood at the entrance, he saw them pounding rice for rice cakes on the dirt floor in a merry and noisy mood. Jiro had to shoulder his way through the men and women till he came to the step to the kitchen. Unfortunately for him, he was not noticed at all in the midst of the mess. His cousins were making cakes with grandmother on the kitchen floor. Grandfather, auntie, and her husband were not to be seen. Probably they were working somewhere else. In such a hustle and bustle, Jiro just kept standing alone with his parcel in his hands. Nobody would talk to him. All his pleasant thoughts disappeared, and he burst into a loud cry. "Oh my!" said one of the women. "Dear me!" said another. Then all the eyes were turned to him. "It's you, Jiro. When did you come?" said Grandmother Masaki. She rose up and approached him, dusting the flour off her hands. His cousins turned to him in surprise, but the little boy did not stop crying. "You didn't come by yourself, I suppose?" she said. "Did you come with your mother?" Jiro did not answer her, but went on crying. "What's the matter with you, Jiro?" she said. "Oh dear, you have a parcel with you. What's it?" He offered it to her in tears. Grandmother took it and said, "Stop crying. Tell me, did you come by yourself, Jiro?" He nodded with great effort, crying louder. Grandmother opened the parcel and said, "Oh, here's a letter. Let me see. Oh my, they sent you all by yourself. Poor thing." Her words made his crying become still louder. "Don't cry, dear. Come on in," she said. "We are pounding rice for the cakes. You'll find it interesting. Jiro, how brave you are. You're some boy to come alone all the long way. Didn't you get lost on the way?" Jiro shook his head, still in tears. Grandmother took his hand and led him to the dining room, where she hastily made him some rice cakes covered with parched bean flour. Then she said to the men with an unusually sullen look, "I want some of you to go to the Hondas and tell them Jiro arrived safe and that I'll keep him overnight. Please go right away. What a shame to send such a small child along this away. They don't seem to worry about him at all. How unworthy of them." Jiro thought that she was blaming his father and felt a bit uneasy, but the merry and noisy business of rice pounding made him forget everything soon. He also set to making rice cakes with his cousins joyfully. Chapter 11. The Wax Shed. That night, Jiro stayed at the Masakis. Early the next morning, his cousins took him to the wax processing shed. They played wrestling, hide and seek, and so on most of the day. As it was near the end of the year, only one press was running, but the smell of boiling wax drifted all over the workshop. Jiro found it interesting to see the heaps of pressed seeds thrown into the furnace to burn vigorously with a crackling sound. There was something strange about Jiro when he was with his cousins at the Masakis. He became sentimental and easily wept for the least reason. His cousins were not so bad as to bully him, but there were some quarrels or collisions against each other during their play. It was always Jiro that broke into tears. It would have been incredible to those who knew him at his own house. He burst into tears on that day too, when he was wrestling with Tetsuo, a boy as old as himself. His elder cousins were consoling him this way and that when a very unexpected person came up. It was Ohama. "Dear me, here you are, master," she said. "We've not seen each other a long time, have we?" Jiro was looking at his nurse absent-mindedly for a while. Then, casting his eyes down in shame, he turned his back to her. "What's this?" she said, crouching down face to face with him. "Oh, I see. You were weeping, weren't you?" And she sat down on the straw mat spread before the furnace and drew him down. His cousins were watching them curiously, but soon went out of the shed. "How have you been keeping since you went home?" she said. "Didn't you get sick? You look a little thinner." "Yes, you do. I never forget you, Jiro-chan, even for one day, but I can't call on you till your mother allows me to make it. So I sometimes come here to hear of you. How lucky I am today. I'm so happy to see you again. You came here yesterday, didn't you?" Jiro nodded faintly with his face down. "I was told that you came here by yourself," she said. "How absurd! Was it your mother who told you to do so?" "No," he said. "Who was it then?" "My father." "Your father!" she cried. "Your own father told you to do such a thing. Why didn't you say no to him? You should say no even to your father at a time like this." But what? You're always too reserved. That's no good, Jiro-chan." "But Kyo-chan wouldn't run this errand," said Jiro. "Did your father tell him to go too?" "Yes, but he didn't say he would go, so I came." "If Kyo-chan didn't want to come, then you didn't want to either, did you? You're younger." "But I like my father," said Jiro. "Do you? You like him so much?" said Ohama. "Yes, he never scolds me aloud. "How nice of your father," she said. "But I'm sure you were scared yesterday, weren't you?" "No, I wasn't," he said, perking up his tiny shoulders. "How brave you are." "I like the Masakis," said Jiro. "Really? You like them so much?" "Yes, I do. I like this house much better than mine. Nobody scolds me with angry words here." "But you sometimes fight against Tatsuo, don't you?" "It's just wrestling, not a fight, but I fight against my brothers at home." "But you're defeated by them, aren't you?" said Ohama. "But I can beat them when nobody is watching," he said. Ohama bit her lips in anger and frowned. "Ohama, I like your house best. Can't I come to see you again?" "I'm sorry, but you can't do it now," said Ohama in tears, drawing him to her breast. "You'll enter the village school next spring. Then we can meet each other every day, so please." Jiro abruptly brushed away her hands and stood up, casting a searching eye to his nurse. He was thinking of his brother, who attended the school every day. Ohama, however, could not understand why he behaved like that. She stretched her hands to him again, but he stepped back like a wild kitten, staring at her. "How come?" "Don't you like school, Jiro-chan?" said Ohama, drawing him to her side again. She sat on the straw mat and held him on her lap. "You won't be a great man unless you go to school. I'm sure you can outdo Kyo-chan in lessons and anything else. He's a crybaby at school. I don't like a weak boy like him. You won't be so mushy because I'll stand by you." At last Jiro could feel relaxed, and they did not leave that place till long after. The steam from the boiling tub with a smell of wax in it, enveloped their flushed faces, making them warm both in body and heart. At lunchtime, Grandmother Masaki made him sit next to Ohama. As she served all the family, Ohama kept a watchful eye on Jiro. She picked up what he dropped on the floor and put it into her mouth before he was aware of it. There were boiled codfish and seaweed in her dish, to which she did not put her chopsticks but nibbled only at the pickled radish. When Jiro's dish was mostly cleared up, she softly pushed hers to him. "No, it's for you," he said, and pushed it back to her. Ohama looked around in embarrassment, but they did not pay any attention to them. She felt relieved and picked up about half the food to put the other half into his dish again. This time it was Jiro who turned red. He had not of late been used to accepting such service without a bit of self-consciousness. He stole a glimpse at Ohama and his cousins, hesitating to eat it. "Are you going back today or tomorrow, Jiro-chan?" said Ohama, meaning to divert their attention from them. But there was no one at the table whose attention should be diverted from them. His cousins cared little about the fact that Ohama shared her meal with Jiro. "I'd like to stay a little longer," said Jiro, picking at it. "Stay here till the New Year's Day, Jiro-chan," said Hisao, the eldest cousin. "But he ought to be at home on New Year's Day," said Ohama in answer to Hisao. "It doesn't matter where he'll stay, does it?" said Hisao. "Hey, Grandma, what do you think of Jiro-chan staying with us till New Year's Day?" "Well, let me see," said Grandmother Masaki, giving a rather indefinite answer to him. "If you don't mind, please let me go with Jiro-san on my way home," said Ohama a little formally, with her hands on her lap after putting her chopsticks down on a small table. "There's nothing to worry about," said Grandfather, who was taking his lunch alone at his private table. "Jiro can stay here as long as he likes before he's sent for by the Hondas." It was a very harsh tone for the gentle old man. His cheeks, partly visible behind his beard, looked a little more flushed than usual. "I don't think we have to send him back in a hurry," said Grandmother, agreeing with her husband. "Ohama, why don't you stay with us tonight? You haven't shared your bed with Jiro for a long time, I suppose?" "How nice of you! Thank you very much," said Ohama. "But what will the mistress think, and what will she say to me if she knows it?" "Never mind, leave it to us," she said. "My husband can teach her a lesson when she comes next." Ohama shook with delight and whispered to Jiro, "Let me sleep with you tonight." Jiro, however, kept silent and went on stirring the grains in his bowl with his chopsticks. It was unusual for him to look so bashful.